The NFL is back tonight, and Mike Carlson is back with us here on OTB AM. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning. I was just meditating on the Tour de France.
No better way to meditate.
One of the greatest things I've ever done was cover the Tour de France. It was fantastic. It's absolutely amazing.
What for the entire tour, or was it a particular section?
Just a particular section. When we had some I just went down to sort out some problems with the organizers, but I got to ride in the caravan of cars behind the peloton, which go down the mountains or up the mountains as well, two abreast on these little mountain roads. And then when someone in the peloton needs help and signals, their team car pulls into the middle and everybody else goes to the outside, and the team car goes up the middle. And if you're on the outside, you're looking right down the side of the mountain. It was like, get me out of here, But it's an amazing event. It's like an Olympic Games. It just consumes you totally for 2 weeks.
Will said here, Ger and I both been very fortunate enough to get over to the Tour de France. And here I was there, a car actually went over that side that you're speaking about, Mike. And thankfully everybody was okay in it. But those drops are ginormous, they're terrifying, and somebody actually drove right off it but at a hairpin bend. It's crazy. Yeah. We must catch up on your cycling history some other time, but tonight it is very much Kansas City Chiefs against Houston Texans. It's 1:20 Irish time if you're up for staying late or getting up for it. It's hard to know how things are going to pan out, Mike. My theory is that, I guess, we've got a very clear number one team in the NFL here. We've got a superstar in Patrick Mahomes, and it doesn't help the chasing pack that preseason has been stymied a little bit.
It doesn't help much of anybody, really. And I'm not convinced the Chiefs are a clear number one, not even in the AFC, where I think the Ravens are probably going to give them a good run. But the two of them are certainly ahead of the rest of the pack. And Houston is the kind of team you'd expect would have more problems than most, because obviously trading away DeAndre Hopkins, Bill O'Brien's trying to institute a sort of new sort of offense with lots of receivers that he can throw to rather than concentrating on DeAndre all the time. He's also got to kind of break in a new running back in David Johnson, who has not been the same David Johnson since his knee injury. And you just wonder how that all is going to work, because like every team, they haven't had much chance to try it out under contact, under game conditions, which is really the only way you find out about individual players, the way you find out about how your schemes work. And, I just wonder if they're going to be ready. Kansas City, on the other hand, returned most of their team. If Duvernay Tardif hadn't stayed in Canada to work in hospitals, basically, he opted out of the season. And Damian Williams, the tailback, opted out of the season, but they've got a rookie tailback, Clive Edwards-Helaire, to take his place. But you don't know how that's going to work out. And you'll be reliant, I suppose, on Mahomes. But if you have to be reliant on somebody, that's a pretty good guy to be reliant on.
How big an issue is that of teams being affected by the pandemic, of players opting out? Are Kansas City relatively unscathed, relatively speaking?
Yeah, they should be able to replace one guard. They've got kind of three candidates. I'm not sure who's going to win. A couple of teams have been very heavily affected, especially, I think, the Patriots, who lost four more or less key players, including one of their tight ends, who they still don't have a replacement for, but three defensive starters. And when you looked at the other starters who they've lost in free agency, their defense is basically like a college team that's graduated all their lettermen and having to build from scratch. The secondary is more intact than the front seven. But I think that, as much as, if not more than Tom Brady's loss, is going to be the factor that makes this season difficult for the Patriots.
How good is Cam Newton going to be? If he's fit, is it possible he's back to MVP level? And is the very notion of him being fit actually ridiculous in and of itself?
That's the whatever it is they gave him to play, $7 million question, I guess. He's a bargain. If he's back to his MVP form when they went to the Super Bowl, that would be a huge, because it would open up things for their offense. Right now, their whole running game is questionable, and they don't have a great group of receivers for him. So the running threat of Cam would add something. If he's back to where he was 2 years ago when Carolina went 6-2 in the first half of the season, and Cam was remarkably efficient as a quarterback, that would be fine with them too. I suspect that the answer is going to be somewhere in the middle. And if he is fit, they're probably not going to want to risk him running the ball a whole lot, but they're going to use that kind of threat of options a little bit to take pressure off him. Their offensive line is probably back to where it expects to be. And to me, the question is whether they'll actually be able to put up enough points to get teams to chase them, in which case having the great secondary that they do will come into play a lot more than it would if teams can keep the ball on the ground against them. You think back to when they were beaten in the playoffs by the Titans, and that's basically what the Titans did.
Mike, we started the show this morning by asking the question, which of the Glazers sports franchises were more likely to be hoisting a trophy at the end of the year? The odds with the bookmakers are fairly similar. It's 11-1, I think, for the Bucs and 12-1 for Manchester United to be winning the Premier League. What's your take on that? The Glazers know how to invest, and they've done really well with Tampa.
Yeah, they've had. This is it's almost a new thing with them. And, I think they've benefited from taking advantage of a good situation whereby signing Tom Brady. And I think he's won the quarterback controversy in Tampa, and he's likely to start with Brady and then Gronk coming along for the ride, as it were. And they were smart in hiring Bruce Arians, and not least because Todd Bowles came in that deal, basically. Having lost the Jets head coaching job. He was the defensive coordinator for Arians in Arizona in days when they kept Arizona in games when after Carson Palmer had got hurt, after his villain had got hurt, they didn't have much of quarterback, but they were able to keep in a lot of games in that division. They ran Seattle tough a number of years there. And I respect his coordinator ability a lot, and they've got some real talent on defense too. I think signing Leonard Fournette when he became a free agent with the mismanaged, shall we say, Jacksonville Jaguars, got the bookies to put the odds down a bit lower, and for good reason, because Fournette in this offense could become a real threat. He could be what we've expected him to be throughout his NFL career. They've got a slight problem now in that Mike Evans appears to have done his hamstring again. And I'm not sure how long he's going to be out. They don't really have, it's hard to have a replacement for Mike Evans. They don't really have a solid number 3 receiver. They were looking at Miller as a slot guy. But they do have 3 tight ends, including Gronk, who can catch the ball. So you might see some other stranger alignments from them. The big thing with Brady, we've all been saying for months now, is that Arians loves longer, slower developing pass plays. And Brady obviously is not the most mobile guy in the world. He's very good at making time for himself by moving a step here or there in the pocket. But in the last few years, his tendency has been not to stand in to make the slower developing throw. If he's under pressure, he gives it up rather than risk a bad throw. Now, how that's going to pan out, whether Bruce Arians is going to change his style a bit, which I think he will, given that he's got 3 tight ends who can catch the ball, and go with more shorter developing plays, more precision plays, that would make a lot of sense to me because, you look at the way Kansas City uses the tight ends. There's a couple of other teams that use the tight ends, the 49ers being a good example. I think he'll see that and see there's real potential there with O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate and Gronk as guys who can stretch the field in multiple directions. I don't know if it makes up for Mike Evans' loss, but I don't think that's going to set them back terribly for the short term.
Yeah, the Fournette signing, great news for Tampa Bay Buccaneers, terrible news for any fantasy leagues that drafted 2 weeks ago before the trade actually happened because he's going to have a lot of competition to get on that ball. If we're talking about Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski here, surely you look at these guys and say, as the season wears on, they can't possibly produce the sort of output that we were used to 5-6 years ago. We surely can't see that again, Mike, or can we?
Well, last year was an anomaly for Brady. I think he was unhappy. Their offensive line wasn't good. His receiving core wasn't good. It was a huge disappointment. And I think you could see that both in the way that they played and also in his willingness to leave New England, which I remember coming on this show after the season and thinking he would probably stay as they rebuilt. What they needed last year, they were a 7-9 team, and if you take away the turnovers, not just interceptions, but Jameis was also a guy who was vulnerable in the pocket because he didn't have a good sense of where the rush was coming from. So you got a lot of fumbles as well. If you took away the fumbles and the interceptions, they're probably at least a 10-6 team, just like that, because they gave away a lot of games in the late stages of games. Now, obviously, you also can't say that without saying, okay, we're going to take away some of the touchdown passes. But Tom Brady threw, what was it, 24, I think, last year or the year before. If Brady gives them 24 touchdown passes and only throws 6 or 9 interceptions instead of 30 and 30, they're way ahead of the game, which is why I think that they will be serious contenders in the South. I don't think they're as good a team right now as New Orleans is in that first game. that game on Sunday night is going to be a great one, Tampa and New Orleans. And we talk a lot about Brady being past it, but Drew Brees is 41 years old and missed 5 games last year where Teddy Bridgewater quarterbacked. It's going to be a kind of old timers night. I'm not sure. I should have checked this before I started talking. Whether 43 and 41 is the oldest. I think it was Brady and Josh McCown who set the record for the oldest total combined age of 2 starting quarterbacks in an NFL game. But 84 has got to be up there.
It really does. I think the previous record actually is set by Brady and Rivers. So I think this one would surpass it. At least that's just from a very.
Rivers is still in there too.
Yeah, obviously, but Rivers is 38 now, 37 at this point. So this is it. We're seeing records getting broken. Jerry, you were making the point earlier on that the QBs around the league are incredible. How quickly has this happened, Mike? Is this because you'd certainly be talking about crisis mode in that position quite regularly 2-3 years ago at this point. It now seems all of a sudden, I'm not sure, has offensive coordination just got a lot better, where they're recognizing how to utilize their QB best, or what's the reason for this?
Well, I think in one sense there's an exaggeration in that if you look at teams with quarterback decisions to make, like Dak Prescott, whose contract is going to expire in Dallas and needs an extension. The longer Jerry Jones waits, the more expensive he's going to get. There's a group of quarterbacks, which is about 10 deep, who are way ahead of the other 20. So a premium, I don't like to use the word elite now, but a premium quarterback is still a difficult thing to find. But I think what's happened is that, and the NFL has adjusted gradually to the changes in college football, notably the spread formations. And that has opened the game up a bit to more college-style quarterbacks. Now when you see Cliff Kingsbury coaching in Arizona and you see Matt Rule getting the job in Carolina, these are guys who are being hired particularly for that kind of ability. And the interesting thing was this whole system, it's not new in college football, but it's developed slowly by smaller college teams. And Kingsbury and Rule had great success in college to an extent, but that great success was merely treading water against the really big teams. These systems were designed to be able to overcome teams that had a big talent advantage against you, to take advantage of what you could do. And as they've been adapted in the NFL, they've created really interesting situations that talented young quarterbacks can come in and take advantage of right away. And I think what you look at is a guy like Jared Goff, who maybe 10 years ago would have come in the league and be drifting around like a Kyle Bowler or somebody like that. But because Sean McVay was coaching and because he had all of these concepts that he'd added to the NFL offense from these kind of college ideas, he's able to mold Jared Goff to the point where he's efficient, sometimes really good, but you can obviously see where his problems might have been before. And, I love the idea that with Lamar Jackson, say we've got a running option quarterback again. There's always the risk in the NFL because defenses are so much better and players, every player has a certain higher level of skill than most college teams. That injury is always a worry. We saw that with RG3, for example. His career was sidetracked basically by injury, taking away his mobility. In Houston, they've tried to keep Deshaun Watson from doing that much running. Cam Newton is another obvious example. Colin Kaepernick did get injured, and played really well in San Francisco, but he hasn't played in 4 years for other reasons. So, I like the variety that you're seeing now. Tennessee is an old-fashioned run the ball first, grind it out, win by defense kind of team. Baltimore is an option running attack, which you probably 5 years ago wouldn't have thought you'd see again in the NFL. Arizona is going to be a wide open air raid offense, and I love that variety. That opens up avenues for quarterbacks who can be well coached, who have talent and can be well coached. But for every Pat Mahomes, there's a Mitch Trubisky.
Well, yeah. Well, look, who knows where Trubisky's going to end up this season? Styles make fight, so it's going to be a great season in that term. One last question, Mike. The prospect of games being stopped for COVID looms very large, given the close proximity that's it's essentially 80 people in the building, in the facilities, when you include the practice squad and the 53-man roster. So, I mean, look, we're hoping that this season progresses and that everybody is smart and doesn't go out to clubs late at night and doesn't breathe in the fumes of other people. And, but I mean, that's not going to happen, is it?
I don't think so. I think it's almost unavoidable. The last set of testing that they did, only one player apparently had tested positive, but a number of ancillary staff had done. And that's part of the problem. And been saying it for a long time. Even beyond the players on the field, you don't want them going out and spreading infection in their wider communities, within the team, within the families, within the friends. It comes very, very quickly, and you don't have a bubble situation, obviously, in the sense that everybody's bubbled the way basketball can do because there's so many fewer players involved, and you can only do what you can do with your team. Given that they're young, healthy players, you might see a lot of asymptomatic people for a while. But given that they have a lot of players who are either black and or very big, and those are two particularly vulnerable categories of people with higher levels of infection rates. I think they need to be very, very careful. And I really think that it's only going to take one or two clusters of infection around the league to then make people take things much more, or reconsider, say. They've added to the practice squad so that they can bring new guys in, but at some point, if the integrity of the competition starts to suffer, that's going to be as big or almost as big a consideration for the league as the possibility of wider spread of infection. The two things together could well be some sort of knockout punch. Maybe you pause the season for a few weeks and then you restart. I don't know, but there's an awful lot of impetus to keep the season going right now. There's an awful lot of celebration that the season is going, but we are walking a tightrope.
Well, enjoy the season for as long as it lasts, Mike.
I hope so.
Thanks a million for joining us this morning. We'll chat to you again soon.
Thanks, Ian.